Welcome to Magical Experiments, and today I want to talk about life design magic. This is prompted by a conversation I had earlier today with my sweetheart, where she was asking me a really interesting question that if you could do magic, for the purposes of getting your words to intentionally be heard, like be heard with the actual intentions that you had, what would that look like? So this was all right, let's restart this here because this always happens with these live videos. So Taylor Ellwood with Magical Experiments, and today I'm talking about life design magic, and this particular video was inspired by my sweetheart Joanna, who had asked the question of me today, like if you could do a magical working so that people could understand the intentions behind your words and get them, what would that look like? And so we ended up talking about different ideas around that, and it got me thinking about how sloppy magic can be sometimes, where a person will do a magical working for a result, but they won't really look at everything they're putting into getting that result, and they'll end up getting what they'll do will go sideways, and they won't get quite what they thought they were going to get. And I was telling her, Joanna, a story about somebody who'd done a honeypot spell, and then later on made that as part of an offering in order to find a magical teacher, and how the magical teacher they got wasn't quite what they expected, and it didn't work out quite the way they expected. And a lot of that was because I think that the magic takes the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance really is fundamentally that, okay, here's this fundamental path, right? Magic, we apply magic toward it, and magic says, okay, I'll get you there, and I'm going to take the easiest path more often than not, unless you deliberately set up specific protocols. And this happens a lot with results-based magic, and I'm not saying you can't get great results. You can, but it's interesting because more often than not, people are enchanting for short term. And I think that a better approach is to take a long-term approach, a life design approach. So, and I've talked about this before, but I'll talk about it again, no doubt. But for me, life design magic is magic where I'm looking at my overall life, and I'm asking myself, how can I apply magic to help me gradually get to where I want to be in my life, and to steer things in a specific direction. And I'll say this as someone who has lived a lot of my life by reaction. I didn't come to this realization right away. I mean, I would say, in all fairness, that it probably came to me in the last 7 or so years, really, that I had this fundamental realization around magic by design, life design magic, as opposed to magic for results. I mean, I was doing some of that even before then, but it's interesting that it's become much more nuanced in the last 7 years for me. And even in the midst of that, I've gone through some significant life upsets, because in doing this kind of work, I had to fundamentally recognize that there were going to be some changes. I mean, my life at the time that I started really doing this work was very different. I was married at the time. I I'd just gotten out of a business. I was that hadn't worked out. I was, having to really start over in some areas of my life. And in the next few years, I ended up getting divorced. I went through some other changes. So you might say, well, it doesn't sound like you were really designing your life all that well. And I'd say, yeah, initially it wasn't. There were a lot of elements of my life that had to be changed in order for the life design magic to work the way that I would say I wanted. And even now, I'm still having to do some work around that. But it's interesting because in the last few years, I mean, things have become a lot better. After a lot got dumped out of the way, or changed or transformed because it wasn't working, And that's not a comment either, I might add, on the people that I was involved with at the time. It just wasn't working. And part of that was because fundamentally I wasn't being honest with myself about what I needed and wanted. I was deferring to other people in ways that wasn't healthy for me. What I fundamentally did, though, is in the last few years, I bought a house. I've become much more focused on my mission and purpose for life, both in terms of my writing and in terms of the some of the other work that I'm doing, and I'm gradually steering my life in the direction that I want to go toward. It's becoming a lot quicker actually because it's gained momentum. And I think with this life design work that's what happens. You get this idea like this is what I'd like my life to become, and then you work on it and you tweak it and you improve on it, and steadily it gets better and better as you iron out what is not needed anymore in order to get you where you want to go. And then you start putting into place what you do want, and you manifest that into your life in a way that is significant and powerful because it helps you stay really focused in on what matters to you. But you have to get clear on what you want out of your life. Like, where do you want to live? What do you want to be doing with your life? Who do you want in your life? What is that going to look like? And I think a lot of times we don't look that far ahead. We're living in the moment, having our experiences and our fun, and dealing with our crises and everything else. But we need to be looking beyond that. We need to look at the long term. Where do I want to be? How am I going to get there? What I would ideally say to anybody is, like, if you're going to apply magic, to get results, think about not just what the immediate result is, but what's the long term result. If you were to go all the way to the end of your life, where do you want to be? What do you want to what would your dying self say to you? And a good exercise with this would be, like, if you talk to your dying self, would be, if your dying self said to you, like, if there's one thing I wish I could have done differently or whatever, like, listen to that dying self and then actually go and do that thing. um, you know because a lot of times we defer our own dreams and our own desires and our own wishes and everything else because we're trying too hard to make our lives fit into the beat of someone else or something else, or we're trying to conform to societal standards and ideas as to how our life should look. But fundamentally, we need to really examine and look at the direction that we want to move our lives in. Where do I really want to be? Who do I want to associate with? How do I want my life to look? And these are not easy questions to answer, but they are important questions to answer. The more it's interesting because if I look at my life and where I was 7 years ago, I would say, it was an okay life. It wasn't by any means like the most amazing life, because it wasn't. I was doing a lot of work I didn't really want to do. I was dealing with stepkids I didn't really care for, and who didn't really care for me, and I was dealing with uh, trying to conform my life to a type of relationship that I really didn't want, and having to keep a lot of what I did under wraps because of how it might impact someone else. And so it was a life where, when I fundamentally started making these changes, when I look back now, I'm not surprised that I ended up getting divorced. I'm not surprised that other changes occurred because I'm living my life a much more authentically now, because I'm living it in accordance with my deepest desires and needs, and with integrity around what matters to me. But that didn't happen without a sacrifice, and it was a hard thing to. At the time, what was hard about it was sacrificing that comfort, but it didn't fit into my overall life design. I mean, if I was still in the relationship that I had been in, I would probably be living in Canada right now, uh, alone a lot of the time, because the person that I was with would be out busy working, like, in an art gallery stuff and all that, and I wouldn't really be living my best life. It wouldn't have been the life I wanted. And of course, I'd still be dealing with that person's stepkids to some degree or another. And now it's much better, I'm not having to deal with all that. And instead, I have my own house. I'm choosing to live my best life, following through on like what really matters to me, which is my magical practice, my writing, my skills as a teacher. I'm getting ready to go back to school and become a counselor for men. Doing a lot of men's work. So all of that has added up toward creating a much more cohesive and clarified life around what matters to me and living according to my values. And that's huge. So I think like it's really important to recognize these things and ask yourself, what does my ideal life look like? And enchant for that instead of just enchanting for the short-term results.